I'm sure most of you have known Jim for some time. Back in the 1990s, when we first started selling bulls, I thought, you know, there's no cows halfway across Kansas, there's no cows, and so I didn't even look at Missouri. And when remember the drought of 2002, Scott?
Yeah, sure do.
We sent, all of us here in Colorado sent a lot of cows somewhere. And I sent a lot of cows to Missouri, and by golly, there's already cows there. And that's kind of, I had the guy I was leasing my cows to in southern Missouri was familiar with Jim in northern Missouri, and Jim had me up there to speak to Green Hills Farm, a group of very progressive minded people. But I've probably had more speaking engagements in Missouri than any other state since then. But anyway, that was my first acquaintance with Jim. Most of you know Jim is quite well known. He doesn't live in Missouri anymore. Been 22 years and some months you lived in Missouri. But he's in Idaho now because of the mountains, and you might talk about that later. Okay. And we love our western mountains. Anyway, Jim has, I think the state of Missouri benefited greatly from the teachings that he had there, especially in grazing. You know, the genetics, everything he talks about, we kind of seem to agree. Jim is now consulting and speaking around the world, all continents except for 2. Is that right?
Yeah, I haven't gone to Africa, and they don't graze on Antarctica.
No cows up there, no grazing. Anyway, I've seen this presentation, if he didn't change it up too much. I've seen it twice in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Very, very educational, eye-opening. You know, those of us in the cow-calf business, these are things we need to know. I think what determines profitability? And I think that's a big subject for us right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, Kit. Always a true delight to work with Kit, and it's a real honor to be back here in Burlington again.
You've been here twice before.
I've been here twice before. At your bull sales, I have passed through countless times. But most of the time I didn't stop. But 3 times, this is the 3rd bull sale I've spoken at, and I said, as Kit said, I know a lot of you by name. Some of you, I said, well, I've seen that guy before. Don't necessarily recognize him. So what we're going to do tonight, as Kit said, is talk about what determines profitability in grass farming. And when we were talking about doing this program, I said, hey, should I say ranching, just because, you know, Colorado ranchers might be put off by grass farming. But even if you're, you know, out on 100,000 acres of desert rangeland, it's still grass farming. Fundamental principles are the same. We're really talking business tonight. We'll touch on grazing, we'll touch on cattle genetics, we'll touch on this, we'll touch on that. We've already talked about soil fertility. And chickens might come back again too, you never know about that. So, profit. It's a remarkably simple concept. It is income minus costs. You have to wonder why it's such a difficulty in ranching and the cattle business to consistently make money. Now, nobody in this room might, but a whole lot of your neighbors, I guarantee you, are wondering what it takes to be profitable in the cow business. So, because it's a simple equation like that, we can change profit by increasing income. We have 3 basic ways that we increase income. We have more production units. We run more cows. But I tell you what, if you're already losing $100 a cow, the last thing you want to do is have more of them. We can get a higher price per unit. Now, 30 years ago, you know, we used to say there are no premiums in the beef business. All you try to do is avoid the discounts. Because the buyers, they would discount you for any number of things, but there weren't really premiums. Now, these days, whether you're in the commodity business or you're doing direct market grass-fed beef, there are definitely premiums in the cattle business, and you can earn more dollars for each pound of beef you produce. And then we have adding enterprises. If you've been strictly cow-calf, just keeping your calves over and grazing down the stockers, that's adding an enterprise. Some people have weed problems, and so they decide to add sheep to the mix. Some people have brush problems, and so they add goats to the mix. Some people have cash flow problems, and so they add chickens to the mix. And then we can reduce cost. And we have to think about two levels of cost. Economists always talk about the operating or the variable cost. Those are the costs that as you increase the number of production units or the attempt to increase the output of each production unit, generally your variable costs are going to increase. Overhead, a lot of economists call these fixed costs because they have the idea that you can't change them. And this is where we make the biggest difference in ranching, the types of things that Kit has talked about for years, that Chip Hines has written about for years. Overheads, the things that your neighbors think you have to be in the cattle business. Most of them you really don't. And the difference between most profitable businesses or most profitable ranches and those that are failing is overheads are simply killing those ranches that don't recognize what a significant cost they are. Cost. Yeah, in order to manage anything, including the costs of your operation, you need to know what those costs are. So having good accounting records, to me, is critically important to being successful in the ranching business. We need to know what the overheads are, we need to know what the operating costs, and then we need to tackle them. So there's several factors up there that may or may not affect profitability in ranching, specifically in the cow-calf business, since we have weaning weights and cow size in there. These are the things that we kick around, that we talk about, that we think about. Those of you who participate in the discussion forum, every one of those is something that, we've talked about probably in the last 6 months on there. Things cycle through, we talk about them, and then they go subsurface for a while, and then they pop up again. But these are the things that we talk about. So I think most of the people in this room understand that these are important factors in the business that we think about. Your neighbors may have a mistaken notion of what are most important. We're going to try to sort that out tonight. We're going to look at 3 data sets from the SPA program. SPA is Standardized Performance Appraisal, for those of you who don't know what that is. There's a group of academics, agency people, and ranchers that work together in a group called the IRM Committee, Integrated Resource Management. Originally it was Integrated Reproductive Management because they were only really looking at factors affecting reproduction in cattle, and then it broadened out to have a broader perspective. SPA was developed by that committee. I was not on the committee at that time. I was on that committee for a number of years, but we were looking at different issues. So it says ancient history, 1987 to 1997. The significance of those years is up until the point where we are right now. That was the last time that we actually had a full run of the cattle cycle, of the 10-year cattle cycle. 87 to 97, that's a high point to a low point. So we're looking at 10 years of records from these ranches, and this is from the Northern Plains, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, eastern Wyoming. I think that pretty well catches the states that was covering. So it's the Northern Plains, and each of these 3 that we're looking at, they're going to be sorted out the same way. The low profit group is the bottom 15%. The high profit group is the top 15%, and then the 70% in the middle is what's making up that medium profit or the average group. And the cattle business is one place where you really don't want to be average. I don't know why we benchmark ourselves against average. because average, in this one, the return on assets 2.8% over that 10-year period. That's not doing exceptionally well. The things to note in here that are particularly interesting is if we look at the cost of a breeding female, and again, this is 20 to 30 years ago. The low profit group, $637 per cow. The high profit group, only $270. There were a lot of years where, like through most of the 80s and 90s, and even the tail end of the 70s, we used to talk in terms of the average cost to keep a cow was $300. There's a lot of years where it fluctuated around that, but it didn't change a whole lot from that line. Like I said, from the tail end of the 70s, the 80s and 90s. So, but here we see, over $350 difference in the operating cost per bred cow. And then the net, there's $470 difference. Holy cow, what were calves worth? See if the pointer will work. You know, $390, $423, $495. So we could say that a calf on average, you know, from a cow, she was producing a value of about $450, and the difference from the low profit group to the high profit group is greater than the value of the calf. That tells you right there that somebody's not doing very well. The other really interesting thing on here is, okay, so this is over a 10-year period of time, the best of times, the worst of times of the cattle cycle. The top 15%, 18% annual return on investment. There's not a whole lot of things you could have been doing in that 10-year period that would begin to pay you at that level. And then the low profit group, basically a negative return on asset is what? Loss of equity. So in many of these cases, it was the grandkids burning through the equity that grandpa had built into this ranch on $150, $200, $250 calves. And they're losing money on these high value $450 calves. I want to point out one more thing here before we move on. Low profit group, 413 pounds of weaned calf per cow exposed. High profit group, 455. Oh, the medium profit group is the same. Medium and high profit group had the same pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. Do you think that's from weaning weight? Nah, that's from more cows bred and more live calves coming to the weaning pen. It is not. The actual weaning weights across those three groups were basically identical. Weaning weight didn't have anything to do with profitability. Number of live calves and cost. Operating cost. That's what determined profitability. All right, that's ancient history. We're going to move up to a little more modern era. Now this one is from Illinois, only the state of Illinois. So it's a very different environment from those northern plains, isn't it? Very different. 2000 to 2004, so cattle prices were a little higher at that time. What do we see interesting here? Well, look at that. Isn't that just about the same return on assets that we saw in the northern plains in the previous cattle cycle? The top 15% making double-digit return on investment, the bottom 15% double-digit loss in equity. That's pretty darn consistent. Let's see. Pounds of calf sold per, there it is. Pounds of calf sold per cow, similar sort of thing. I can't get my pointer on the screen. It's on the floor. There. 427, 454, 506. Same deal. In this assessment, weaning weights were about the same, but the more profitable ranchers, more cows bred, more live calves coming to the weaning pen. We look down here and we see the annual cow cost $480. Well, they weren't as bad as those people in the northern plains who had $600 back there in the 80s and 90s. But there's about $200 difference in the cost to keep a cow. And $100 some of that is in feed cost. So we're starting to see a recurring thing. Good ranchers, get high reproduction, keep more calves alive, and have lower costs. So Dr. Miller, he took 26 different parameters that might have effect on profitability. You know, the extension economists and cattlemen sat around and talked about it, and they had came up with a list of 26 different factors that they thought might have an effect on profitability, and then he sorted everything out statistically, and what he came up with was 57% of the variation in profitability across cow-calf operations in the state of Illinois could be attributed to nothing more than cost. Now, there's a whole lot of folks, spring rolls around, bull sales are coming up, they get their sale catalogs, and they're looking at stuff in there, they're checking out those weaning EPDs and things like that. Well, here's calf weight. Less than 5% of the variation in profitability across these 158 ranches could be explained by weaning weight. So what that says to me is it's over 10 times more important to be looking at your accounting records than it is to be studying those bull catalogs. Because your neighbors, by and large, are looking at the bull catalogs and they are looking at the wrong thing. They are looking at EPDs that are going to take them further and further away from the possibility of profitability. Now you guys, who are not your neighbors, you know, you've come to the PCC sale and hopefully you're looking in the catalog at those calving ease ratings, those maintenance requirement ratings, disposition, because by and large, weaning weight isn't that important. Don't waste your time studying weaning weight in the catalogs because it's not going to be the thing that determines your profitability. Let's go to another one. This is from Dallas Mount with University of Wyoming Extension, but also, you know, he teaches the Ranching for Profit School. This is herds from Wyoming and western Nebraska. And lo and behold, what do we see? Cost per breeding female, $280 difference between the high and low profit group. Let's look specifically at hay cost, and wow! That high profit group is only spending 40 bucks per cow for hay. The low profit group, $257. How are they doing that? How are they not spending money on hay? Well, the easy answer is, well, they're grazing more. But what allows them to graze more? I want you to look at one other thing here. Remember that in the previous two data sets, the low profit group actually had fewer pounds of wean calf per cow exposed. The high profit group had the bigger number, but now it's reversed. This high profit group is making their high profit on 100 pounds less calf per cow exposed. How can that be working? And I'm asking for some feedback here. Feel free to shout out what you think is making the difference.
Lower cost.
What's that?
Lower cost.
Lower cost, but why are these people in the high profit group who are producing 100 pounds less calf per cow exposed, how are they getting by with $40 worth of hay?
They're calving later.
They are calving later. This is the first data set that we have that actually shows, when you further sort things out, the low profit group being January to March calving, the high profit group being May to July calving. That is how they're cutting back on hay feeding. That is how they're able to graze those cows through the winter. And that is how, with 100 pounds less calf per cow exposed, they're making more money than their neighbors. These are the kind of things that actually affect profitability in this business. K-State, 2013. Remember, at 2013, we had record high cattle prices. They got even higher in 2014, and then they've been coming down since. But even at those record high cattle prices in 2013, the K-State extension economists, with the budgets that they do every year, figured the average cow-calf operation in Kansas would actually lose $250 per cow exposed. There's something wrong with a business that you have the highest prices you've ever seen and you still can't make money. The focus is on the wrong things. So this is another piece of that Kansas information from the Kansas Farm Management Association. What we have, excuse me, what we have, the blue bars on the bottom, that is feed cost. The red bars on the top are non-feed costs. And then the yellow line is revenue per cow. We look at this and we see just feed cost in 2014, 2015, approaching $600 a head. When calves were worth $1,400, you could make some of that work. When calves are worth $750, it ain't going to work one bit. Now the interesting thing to know is the rate of increase going back to 2005. Going back to 2005, feed costs and non-feed costs have increased at about the same rate. What does that mean? People have bought more equipment. They have built fancier facilities. They've done this, they've done that. Why did they do it? Because they had money burning a hole in their pocket. Tell you a little story. The Texas and Missouri sales, I'm going to do some advertising right now. At the Texas and Missouri sales, I had my bookstore there and I sold books. And people there were great. They bought a lot of it, and some people paid me in checks, some people paid me in cash. I get that cash in my hand. I went to visit my daughter in Missouri after the Springfield sale, and she and her husband have a gun store. Money in my pocket. You know, my gun safe is full. I have about every hunting caliber that you can think of. I've got some recreational shooting stuff though, but you know what? I had money burning a hole in my pocket. So yeah, I came away with something else. I didn't need it, but I had that money in my pocket. And off it went, because it was cash money. Now a lot of your neighbors who bought all this stuff didn't do it with cash money. But this is what we do. When the cattle price comes up, we buy stuff. Whether we need it or not. Maybe we always thought we needed it, and so we go buy it. And then what we see happen is that yellow line relationship. Hey, didn't they start saying about 2007, 2008 that the cattle cycle was broken, that this time it is different, and we're at a new level and the prices are the cycle's dead, there's not enough people in the industry to have the greed factor and then the panic factor that drives the cycle. Guess what? They're still out there and it still happens. And I don't know if we're at the bottom of the price yet. Some of the pundits say we've bottomed out, some say 2019, 2020 is going to be that long before we actually see cattle prices coming up significantly again. But if those prices are going to be down to where we're only getting $600, $700 income per cow exposed, we can't live with $1,200 costs. You can't even, you can go a couple years and not pay your overheads. Only cover operating costs. You can survive at that for a couple of years. But 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, you're going to burn out every bit of equity that you had in that outfit. And you don't want to do that. So that was just Kansas. This is from LMIC, Livestock Marketing Information Center. This is the national average. And this one runs back to 1987. And remember I said that for my coming of age years, the cost to keep a cow didn't change very much. You could say $300, and some people would be higher, some would be lower. And you can see that it's running there between $300 and $400 up to 2002, 2003, and then it becomes a steady march upward. You can't buy lots of stuff and expect to be successful in the cattle business. You know, this is the drum Chip has been beating for years, that the land-grant universities and the seed stock outfits, they took, the breed associations, they took us down this path of increased production per cow, increased production per cow, and the focus was productivity per cow. And people made their cows way more productive, but it still wasn't working. It wasn't paying the bills. And it comes back, as we made those cows more productive, they took more and more money for maintenance, but we were also told how profitable we were going to be when we got these cows bigger and they were more productive. And so on faith, a whole lot of people, and now I'm not going to say just your neighbor, some people in this room probably on faith went ahead and bought stuff, increased their cost to carry a cow on the promise that, hey, this is going to be one, trust me, it will be amazing. You know, anytime I hear someone say, trust me, it will be amazing, I get a little nervous about my wallet. Okay, so the costs have gone up. This is what has to change if we're going to have a viable business. As Kit mentioned, I do consulting work all around the country, different places in the world now. And in the U.S., what I like to, if I'm starting to work with a client and they are not in a good financial situation, the first thing I want to do is, hey, I want to see your operating budget. And if they can't show me the operating budget, then we start building that. That becomes their task, because I can't deal with their unprofitable business if we don't know what the costs are. People have gone to Ranching for Profit school. Usually they can, you know, pretty well say, oh, here it is. And then, excuse me, then we look typically at the top 3 lines in the budget. Because if you want to change the profitability of a business, don't worry about this nickel and dime crap down here. It's those top 3 lines that need to be addressed. So, top 4 costs that I typically find. Guess what? Winter feed. Now what surprises a lot of people is when you start breaking out the components of that winter feed cost, what is it? Particularly east of the plains. This is what kills them. Equipment depreciation. Most cow-calf outfits are overcapitalized in equipment. If you make hay or silage, that's generally where a big chunk of that overcapitalization lies. Now, you can look at a reasonable amount of equipment cost to assign to each cow. And how we determine what's a reasonable amount? We look at who's making money in the business and use their investment in equipment per cow as benchmark. So if you wanted to go out and buy not a new line of hay equipment, but good quality used equipment, how many cows do you think it takes to justify owning your own hay equipment? Anybody want to throw out a number?
500.
500, that's close enough. In what I figured, basically it takes 600 cows to justify owning your own hay equipment. You go east of the plains, oh, I bet there's some west of the plains here, I bet there's some in this county. People who have 60 cows and have a full line of haying equipment. And they might even have PCC cows and say, oh, I got the right kind of cows, I'm going to, you know, life's going to be great, I'm going to be profitable. But if you're over-invested in equipment, facilities, things like that, having the best cows in the world aren't going to make it work. It takes a different business model. Then you got the equipment operation, fuel, repair and maintenance, labor, all that stuff comes into play. Fertilizer. It's interesting that when a lot of people decide, wow, I can't afford to make hay anymore, I got to cut back on expenses, the first thing that they cut out is the fertilizer. And their yield goes down. And so their cost per ton of hay produced goes up because the yield per acre has gone down. And then out here in the west, we have that irrigation cost. So there's winter feed. Land. One of the things that drove up that curve in cow costs was pasture rent. You know, pasture lease rates have gone up considerably, especially in the West, the Midwest, Southeast. Yeah, it's not so bad down there. But that land cost, whether you own it or you lease it, if you've bought a ranch with the intention of paying for it with the cattle, well, good luck on that one. There's a few places and a few enterprises that you can do that with, but by and large, it doesn't work because land is priced for non-agricultural values in most areas now. And so you can't expect cattle to pay for that land. We have labor, which we'll come back to a little bit later. You know, when you look at a lot of the really successful ranches in the West, those ones that are consistently earning those double-digit returns on investment, they figure 1,000 cows per employee. That's what they expect to happen. If you ask the typical state cow-calf extension specialist, well, how many cows can mom and pop outfit take care of? And it'll be 400, maybe 600. Successful ranches are at 1,000. The Australian national standard is 1,500 cows per FTE. The real successful stations or ranches in Australia, it's 3,000 cows per FTE. What's the difference? Why does a U.S. university extension specialist say mom and pop can take care of 500 cows, but in Australia they expect it to be 3,000? In Australia, they expect the cows to do the work. The idea of making hay, feeding hay, assisting a cow, having calving difficulty, those are just ideas that don't even come into an Australian operator's mind. Here, we have a certain sensitivity towards the animals. We think we have to feed them. We think we have to nursemaid them through calving and all that. And that just drives up the labor cost per cow tremendously. Cows need to work for a living. All right, now, there's one that's missing out of there, and it actually looks like it should fit in above land and labor. Anybody know what that missing cost is?
Depreciation.
Cow depreciation. And a lot of operations, cow depreciation is actually a bigger cost than winter feed. And cow depreciation is a real cost. It's not something that economists made up to make, cattle business look bad. If you went out when cow prices were high and you paid $2,000 for a cow, and she's had 3 calves for you, and she turns up open, what is she worth as a cull cow today, as an open cull cow? Depends on whether she's skinny or fat, but somewhere between 52 and 64 cents a pound. Let's call it 55 cents a pound. And she might weigh 1,200 pounds. That's $660. You gave $2,000 for her. Where did that $1,340 go? It went down to 2. If she only had 3 calves for you, you have a cost against that calf of almost $500 just because of cow depreciation. That is a very real cost, and it is killing a whole lot of people right now. So cow depreciation goes in there. So these are the things that if we want to change the nature of the business, if we want to change the bottom line dramatically, those right there are the things that have to be addressed. So overhead costs, we got those, whether you bought the ranch, you got a land payment, that's a cost. You got to pay taxes. I mean, we dance around it, we fight it, we do everything in our power not to pay taxes, but hey, the property taxes, other things are there. Salaries, full-time labor, whether you have any cows or not, and you got a hired guy in the place, that's an overhead. So there's other things that come in there. Operating costs, those that are variable costs, those are the ones that change as we add more production units. We ask ourselves, how many of these are actually necessary? Of course, we have the feed costs there, and that's, the big one. And it's because a whole lot of people work for their cows don't work for them. You change that one component, and it makes a huge difference in what's going on. We're eventually going to get to the factors. We're just setting the stage right now so we're all on the same page and understanding, the basic business. After I look at a client's operating budget and we identify, okay, these are your big costs, what are we going to do about it? Then we do a gross margin analysis, and gross margin is the difference between the value of your product and the operating cost to produce it. We've got an example coming through right here, but in any manufacturing business, whether you're making bed mattresses, cars, or calves, those are manufacturing businesses, and the same basic business principles apply. And in any manufacturing business, we would like to have our cost to produce, our operating cost to produce that product be less than 50% of the value of our product. All right, so we have this cow out here, and our cost for maintaining that cow, our operating cost, are $520. Calf sells for $800, our gross margin is $280. That is only 35%. $280 margin over $800 value of the product, our gross margin is only 35%. It is going to do us far more good to reduce our costs by $100 than it is to get $100 more for that cow. In terms of return on our assets, in terms of true profitability, we need to reduce costs by $100, not increase the value of the product by $100. Now, if you can reduce the cost by $100 and add $100 more value to it, then we're walking in, in the South you say, then you're walking in high cotton. We don't want to be walking in high cotton, we want to be walking in high grass. So, critically important point, until you get your gross margin to greater than 50%, focus on cost reduction, not increased production. Then we have this overhead ratio, and that is how much of the total costs are in the overheads. So it's overheads over gross income. Dave Pratt with the Ranching for Profit Schools, and at this point, I'll ask, how many of people here have been to a Ranching for Profit school? Okay, a quarter to a third. I would strongly encourage any of you, thank you, I appreciate that. I would strongly encourage any of you who are actually in the cattle business, not the cattle hobby, to get to a Ranching for Profit school. It's a week-long school. It's a couple $1,000. It's a big investment, but it is one of the things that can completely change your life and how you operate. And my experience doing consultation with people who have been to Ranching for Profit school and people who have not, it's a very different experience of what they know, what they understand, what they're willing to change and do. So RMC is Ranch Management Consultants. That's the parent company of Ranching for Profit. They recommend 50% overhead ratio. I'm more of a hard ass. I'm looking for 33%. I don't want any more of my cost of production on overheads to be more than 1/3 of my expected value. Now guess what? I don't take the very lowest cost that it might, or income from a calf that it might be, because like I say, you can withstand a couple of years of not covering every cost. I don't look at the highest. I look at something that's about, if we have this level being average, I'll look at the cost that's about 20% below that. And that's what I'm going to benchmark my overheads against. So here's the example here. If the overhead costs are $240 and the income per cow is $800, that is an overhead ratio of 33%. This $800 is about what the income on a cow is right now in a good operation. That's the combination of calf income and cull cow income. So $240, $250. To me, that's a reasonable target to be working towards in the cow-calf business when you look at what your investment in land, facilities, equipment, your tax bill, salaries and wages, you look at that total number divided by the number of cows that you expect to run on this operation, and if it's over $250, you probably need to do some whittling. If you're down there at 195, congratulations, you're probably well on your way to being a very successful operation. All right, so now we're going to hit these factors that determine profitability. Let me get my bottle opened here. There's also that classic line, I think from Groucho Marx, I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. Okay, so that first one says operating at optimal economic and biological carrying capacity. Holy cow, what does that mean? Carrying capacity, of course, is the number of animal units, however one expect it. Usually I'm working in animal units. It's the number of animals that the property, the grazing resources will support, giving you a livable income and at least maintaining, but hopefully improving, regenerating the quality of the land. That's what carrying capacity is. All right, so the more animals you have to sell, generally the higher the revenue stream is going to be. That's pretty darn simple. If you operate way below the carrying capacity of the ranch, your income stream is going to be down here. If you are operating at or near the optimal carrying capacity, your revenue stream is going to be up here. If you push the number of animals that you have beyond the biological carrying capacity, so you keep pushing animals numbers up, what happens? Individual performance goes down and revenue stream then falls off. So the highest revenue stream that you're going to run is operating at optimal carrying capacity. There are ways that you can increase the carrying capacity of your property. And you know, the big thing that I've worked on for the last 30 plus years is increasing the output of an acre of pasture land through management, through grazing management. And if you can increase your carrying capacity through management, your overhead cost for every pound of beef you produce is going to go down. And if through that management you're getting the cows to do more and more of the work, and you're doing less and less of the work, your labor use efficiency is also going up, which brings your labor cost per animal unit down. I didn't point it out in the Illinois SPA data, but high profit and the low profit group were both had the same size herds. That means you don't have to get bigger, get out. Of the 8 parameters that were on that list, scale of operation or size of herd was the 8th one down there, and the percent of profitability explained by the size of the herd was 0.007%. You can have a big ranch and be very profitable. You can have a big ranch and be losing, money by the truckload. You can have a small ranch and be profitable. You can have a small ranch and not be profitable. But there is a definite scale, efficiency of scale, that one person or one mom and pop unit that they can take it up to and be very efficient at. There does come a point where you can't do it anymore and you have to hire labor. Well, guess what? If you hire a full-time person, you need double the animals that you were doing when it was just you. Because otherwise, if you only increase the number of animals by 20%, but you double your labor bill, that's going to drive up the cost per pound of beef or per calf weaning. So let's think about what determines your carrying capacity. There's a lot of people who say, oh, where we are, it's going to take 30 acres to run a cow year round. And that's the local wisdom. That's the conventional thinking. So everybody starts believing it takes 30 acres to run a cow. Go back to Missouri, it might be 2 acres to run a cow. Go to central Nevada, and it might be 70 acres to run a cow. But there's always a perception of what that carrying capacity is. And a lot of people think that it's dictated, it's determined by the environment in which you live. No. Carrying capacity is determined by the combination of environment and your management. The environment sets the upper limit of productivity in that environment. Your management determines how much of that you capture. And in my experience all across the country, I think the vast majority of pasture and rangeland is operating at 20 to 40% of what the potential is. Most of your neighbors have no idea what that potential might actually be. I would like to believe that most of you are here because you understand that through management you can make things change. And in the discussion group there's various people on there who have talked about increasing their carrying capacity by 50%, 200%, even I think the highest anybody's claimed is 400%. I'm very comfortable with the idea that most of us can take the land we're on and increase productivity by 50 to 100%, basically by doing 2 things. This is the kind of the formula for carrying capacity. Forage production, how much grass can you grow? That's the biggest determinant of carrying capacity right there. How much grass can you grow? Seasonal utilization rate of the grass that you grow, how much of it actually gets into the gut of your livestock? That's a big factor. Daily intake, what does an individual animal need to eat in order to achieve the target level of performance that you need that animal to do so that you can pay the bills, and then how long are you going to feed them for? Those are the 4 determinants of carrying capacity. If we just look at forage production, irrigation, fertilizer, tear it up and plant something different, those are all things that can increase productivity, right? What do they all have in common? Muchos dinero. Every one of those costs money, substantial amounts of money when you start setting those things in place. We can also change forage production by the amount of post-grazing residual that we leave. Now, I know some of the buffalo grass is about that big, and it's hard to leave any more than, that right there. But if you're on irrigated pasture or tall grass, midgrass or tall grass rangeland, leaving more post-grazing residual, changing from 2 inches to 4 inches, can increase the productivity of place by 50%, 100%. That little difference right there is huge. Because of what? Let's see. Because bare soil does not make a good solar panel. If you keep having the cattle graze that down short and leaving bare soil exposed all the time, that's missed opportunity. That's solar energy that isn't getting turned into cow feed. Mature brown plants aren't a very good solar panel. You might have a lot of stuff sitting out there, but if there are not green leaves, you do not have active photosynthesis, you are not creating new cow feed, you're also not feeding the soil. Bare ground and dead brown plants don't feed the soil. Green living plants are what pump carbon into the soil that get your microbes going. This whole thing about soil health ultimately is driven by photosynthesis. The more days that you can maintain active photosynthesis on that landscape, the more productive the land becomes. It takes grass to grow grass. The other important concept is water makes grass grow. That's pretty revolutionary. But the thing to understand is how it affects it. And this table here, over here, we've got the amount of precipitation in the regime, and that might be precipitation, it might be precipitation plus irrigation, but it's total water in the environment. This is the pounds of dry matter forage we expect to be produced per inch of water that falls on our place. And so there's what the potential yield range is over in that far right-hand column. Now, most of you probably, I'm guessing a whole lot of people here live in a place that gets 10 to 15 inch precipitation. How many people live in a 10 to 15 inch precipitation zone? How about the 15 to 20? Less than 10. Okay, so a lot of you have more water than I expected. If you're in this 15 to 20 zone, 20 inch precipitation in a healthy grassland, appropriately managed, you can grow 2.5 tons of forage in a year there. There's a whole lot of your neighbors that are probably growing less than a ton a year in that environment. So what determined carrying capacity? Was it the precipitation environment, or was it the management that we impose within that environment? And that's where our great opportunity is to increase land use efficiency, to increase the pounds of beef produced per acre. It comes in understanding how through management you can capture more water on your land, grow more grass. So building an effective water cycle always starts with maintained vegetative cover. We have to keep the ground covered. Some of you might be farmers as well as cattlewomen, and the cover crop, movement is just really rolling down. And having a living root in the soil more days of the year provides more biological stimulus to the soil, which makes the nutrient cycles function more effectively. Increasing organic matter raises the water holding capacity and the water retention ability of the soil. So maintain vegetative cover. Whether we're talking about perennial pasture, rangeland, or cropland that we're putting the cover on, we've got to keep it covered. We need to be willing to waste some of that grass that we grow. We have to waste grass to put litter on the soil surface to help the water cycle. We do that by balancing use and recovery. This idea that we put the cattle out on, our native pasture on the 5th of May and take them out on the 15th of September and say, oh, we rest that pasture, from the middle of September all the way to May. Well, if it ain't growing, you're not resting it. So recovery has to occur during the active growing season. And the only way you create the opportunity for recovery during the active growing season is by restricting the period of use on this piece of land, then moving here, and so we restrict the period of use so that each one of these fields has an opportunity for recovery during the active growing season. Because we're only going to build viable roots, litter cover, vigorous plants by allowing recovery during the growing season. Building organic matter, I already mentioned the importance of that. We want to avoid animal concentration points. When we concentrate animals, whether that be around a single stock tank, feeding mineral at the same place every year, we tend, at animal concentration areas, we get bare soil. What do we get at bare soil? Well, we get very poor water cycle function, and then we get weeds and all those other things happening. And soil compaction around animal concentration points limits infiltration, increases runoff, which moves nutrients off of the pastures. So part of the benefit of splitting up the big pasture and smaller pastures and having multiple water points is we reduce the number of days each year that animal focus is on that water point. We have another point here, we have another point here. And if you go from having one water point to having 5 water points in that field, you've potentially reduced the animal impact on that particular piece of ground by 80%. And again, that's a big deal out in the real world of grazing. If you've been to very many grazing meetings, you've seen this picture or one very similar to it. And generally the presenter says, okay, over here on the right, this is what set stocking does to your ground. The root system below ground is always a mirror of what's above ground. And so if you keep the pasture grazed real short above ground, you're gonna have a little tiny root system, and carbon is the only element of growth that comes into the plant above ground. Everything else, water, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, zinc, copper, boron, everything else comes through the root system. And if you've got that restricted root system, you're not going to get that stuff in the plant, and you're going to have low productivity. Then he jumps over to this one on the far left and says, here's what happens when you rest the plant. Look at that deep, rich, vigorous root system, and God bless America, mom, apple pie, and all those other things. To me, the most interesting plants in there are the two in the middle. The one on the far left has not been grazed. The one on the far right has been continuously grazed. And the two in the middle are rotational grazing simulations. The one that says 50% above it, that's classic. Take half, leave half. Every time the plants go up to a certain point, they remove 50% of the above ground biomass. And look at the root system under that. It's being grazed, 50% utilization, and the root system is just about as good and vigorous and thick and rich as the one that's not being used at all. We go to the field. We think we're going to move the cattle. We look in there and say, oh, they could stay another day. We let them stay another day and go to that 60 to 70% utilization. It's still rotational grazing. And, you know, maybe two neighbors got EQIP grants. They designed beautiful grazing cells. They put in the stock water. They put in the fence. They're going out there, you know, every day or every 3 days, and they're moving the cattle around. But the one at the take half, leave half, he or she understands what's going on. That, wow, I got a waste of grass to be able to grow grass. And the guy on that next one is thinking, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows, gotta feed the cows. And so he's taking an extra bite every time he comes through here. And the long range effect is this 50% utilization is building soil and organic matter and healthier water cycle function, better mineral cycles than the other guy. But they're both doing rotational grazing. They've got the same tools to do it with, just one has a better understanding of capturing solar energy and managing water. And there'll be a huge difference in the bottom line of that. I didn't mention it, but that previous slide, that's from the 1961 research publication. We've known that a long time. This is from a 1937 publication from the University of Nebraska. And it's comparing, it's a field study, but they put the water on through a sprinkler, so they've put on 3 inches of water in 90 minutes. 3 different pasture situations. The excellent pasture is a native warm season, cool season mix that had at least 20 years of rotational grazing history behind it. They clipped this pasture off to a 2-inch stubble, raked off the clippings. So, clipped down, the tops removed, 2 inches tall, 95% of the ground was still covered by either green living plant material or litter. Only 5% of the soil was bare. Of that 3 inches, a little over 10% ran off. So about 2.6 inches of water went into the soil in that 90 minutes. That's an infiltration rate almost 2 inches an hour. That's pretty darn good. The fair pasture was the recommended stocking rate set stock. And it was at about 2 inches when they put the water on. But 25% of the soil was just bare dirt. 75% was covered. 50% of the water ran off down the hill. Only half of it got in. That 20% more bare ground reduced water infiltration by that much. And then the poor pasture, that was twice the recommended stocking rate set stock. It was, you know, just a bristle on the ground. 50% of the ground was just bare dirt. And 3/4 of the water, 2.25 inches of that water, just ran off down the hill. So how we choose to manage surface vegetation has a huge impact on what the water cycle is going to be. That's a rainfall simulator demonstration, just shows the same sort of thing. When we have a lot of bare ground and dead grass out there, Most of the water loss is just evaporated away. You get a ½ inch rain, if the ground's not covered, and the soil is heating up, and very often between bare soil and covered soil in the middle of summer at 2-inch depth, there'll be a 25-degree difference in soil temperature. And so something like a ½ inch of rain that you get that might only penetrate 3-4 inches into the soil, you know, just shortly after that storm, if that ground is bare and then the storm is past, the sun's hitting it, you can lose most of that water in the next 24 hours. If, however, we had litter on the soil surface, we would have kept most of that water in place and it would have grown grass for us. When we have the ground covered, we can get evaporative loss, so non-productive loss, to a very low level. And the vast majority of our water use then goes to growing cow feed. So the keys to success here for biological carrying capacity is increased forage production through management, not just purchased inputs. Now, is there a time and place for fertilizer? Is there a time and place for irrigation? Yes, very much there can be, but you better have very efficient grazing management in place, and you better have a product that has something more than just commodity value. The way we increase seasonal utilization rate, particularly on irrigated or high natural rainfall pastures, is just shortening the grazing period. The way we increase seasonal utilization rate on rangeland is generally through more stock water development. Yes, we're going to shorten the period of occupancy because we have more stock water out there, but stock water development is the most powerful tool you have for increasing seasonal utilization on big rangeland. We do need to make sure that we're keeping the animals fed to meet the performance level we need to generate the income stream that we're looking for. And we want to graze as many days of the year as possible, because in most cases, grazing is a lower cost way of feeding animals than mechanically harvesting feed. Which is going to bring us to the next one, which is matching your livestock to your environment and forage resources. And this picture, someone posted this on the discussion group, and I don't remember whose picture this was, but I thought, well, you know, there's a nice illustration of two different sized cows. They're both Herefords. You know, that's not just an age difference between those two. There is a big difference in the weight of those cows. So does it really matter? Let's think about what cow size might affect. Now, I had mentioned the IRM committee earlier, and when I was on the IRM committee, the main project we were working on was a computer simulation model for the beef industry. And we had animal geneticists, reproductive physiologists on it, nutritionists on it. There were some ranchers, some economists. There was one other passionate person besides me on it at the time. And so the animal scientists were getting real excited about, yeah, we'll do the simulation model, and you know, we can feed in EPDs of bulls and see what the productivity per cow is going to be as we do these EPD things. And they were getting all excited about it, and I said, yeah, I think this is a great idea to have a model that we can use to simulate actual ranch operations. I mean, you're talking about these, you know, looking at these 40-pound EPD weaning weights. I'd really like to know what that will do to soil erosion. They're looking at me, blank face. And said, why'd we let this guy on this committee anyway? What does he know? And the ranchers who were on there. And I remember Bert Teichert was on there. I don't remember if Greg Simons was at that time. Pete Farrell from Kansas. I thought Wally Olson was on that, but I asked him and he said, no, he wasn't in there. But I mean, there were some of the people I consider real good thinkers in ranch management, and the ranchers all said, yeah, that would be important to know, wouldn't it? And the animal scientists, I don't think they ever did get it, because it never went into the model. But let's think about, as you increase your weaning weight EPDs, if you are retaining heifers, your cows are going to get bigger, right? I think we can all accept that as you select for higher and higher weaning and yearling weight EPDs, cows are going to get bigger. Now, as these cows get bigger, should we rightly presume that calves are going to get bigger? Well, it seems logical, and we'll look at some things and we'll see that. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But if the cows get bigger and the calves get bigger, is each cow-calf pair going to eat more grass out there in the pasture? Well, yeah, they'll do that. We've got plenty of evidence around there. We know that when a cow is eating, she partitions energy to different uses. We have maintenance, we have lactation, we have growth, we have reproduction. And when dietary energy becomes limiting, what's the first thing that goes? Reproduction. So as we make cows bigger, and they physically have to eat more every day, the opportunity of actually filling their rumen completely every day goes down. So bigger cows eating more might have a negative effect on reproductive efficiency. Purchase price, do big cows sell for more than little cows? Depends on what the breeding is, but probably on average they do. Salvage value, yeah, big cow is going to pound out more dollars than a little cow. The carrying capacity question, if we accept the second premise there that forward consumption goes up as cows get bigger, carrying capacity has to go down. If you try to maintain the same number of cows, because Grandpa ran 200 cows in this place, I ought to be able to do that. If you go with that idea and try to keep the same number of animals as the animals get bigger, you are going to start changing pasture and range composition because it is increasing grazing pressure. If you start reducing the desirable plants out there, might weeds come and replace them? And depending on what those weeds are, if they're not creating litter, because they just a stem with a few leaves on there, if they're not creating litter, that's not a good thing, because we know lack of litter is going to negatively affect water cycle function. And if you've negatively affected water cycle function and more water is running off and less is infiltrating, what do you get? Soil erosion. And that's just the flow from big cows to increasing soil erosion. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple more spa summaries here. This is from Dr. Alan Williams, 5 southeastern states. Georgia, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and then either Florida or Louisiana. I don't remember which one that was. It's nothing like eastern Colorado. It rains down there all the time, and it's, low quality warm season grasses. Yeah, but it's still fun numbers to look at. Okay, so here we are. And what Dr. Williams did, this is taken off of producers' records from the spa, and then he normalized the data to these specific cow weights. And he started with the premise that if you had a farm that would support 100 of these 1,000-pound cows, what happens as you increase cow size? And you can see we went from 1,000-pound cows to 1,500-pound cows. Yes, weaning weight increased, didn't it? The weaning weight, they're getting bigger. But what you got for a 50% increase in cow weight was only a 20% increase in calf weight. What's that going to do to feed efficiency when you start looking at things on a whole land basis? It's going to really lower it. All right, so this whole weaning weight thing, the average cow weight has increased in the U.S. over the last 20 to 25 years by about 300 pounds. So here we are, going from 1991 to 2015, looking at calf weaning weights, and there's 4 different sources of information shown on here, and why that one year the spa dropped down there, I don't know. But you kind of see that. Calf weaning weight hasn't changed very much in that 25-year period. The same time period when cow weight has gone up 300 pounds. What did we get for that bigger cow. We sure didn't get bigger calves out of it. What about number of calves? Remember we said as the cows get bigger, they're gonna have a harder time filling their gut every day, meeting their needs. Reproduction is the first thing that goes, and lo and behold, as we went from 1,000-pound cows to 1,500-pound cows, there was a 10% drop in reproductive rate. So the number of calves, that farm stocked with 100,000-pound cows generates 92 calves, stocked with 67 1,500-pound cows, there's only 55 calves out there. You think that might have a little impact on revenue flow? Oh, what actually happened with weaning weight per cow exposed? That's the last column over there. And we see that it initially increased as you went from 1,000 to 1,200 pounds. It did go up. But then through the combination of a slower rate of increase in weaning weight and the fall off in reproductive efficiency, the weight per cow exposed starts trending downward again. And Chip would make the point that the 475 pounds per cow here is worth less per pound than the 444 up here. So the actual revenue might not be any advantage to having those bigger calves. So here in this last column, there is the total value of the calf crop. Wow. As you went from the 1,000-pound cows producing 92 calves to the 1,500-pound calves only producing 55 calves, there's a $28,000 drop in whole ranch revenue. What did those big cows get you? Nothing. And if you couldn't read the little numbers, sometimes we just like to have a graph that shows a line going like that. Yeah. As cows get bigger, moving from left to right on the bottom axis, the value of the calf crop goes down. But remember, those bigger cows are going to pound out for more, aren't they? So we'll make up a whole lot of that by having bigger cull cows to sell. Well, that's what this column over here is. Well, it only goes from 4,800 to 10,000. So yeah, we moderated a little bit, but this column now over here is combined cull cow sales, calf crop sales, and we lost $22,000 as we went to bigger cows on the same piece of property. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not going to work. Oh, and something that I haven't factored in here that also comes into play, because you have a higher cull rate, because you have more open cows, you don't have as many of those heifer calves to sell out. You've got to retain those heifers to replace the cows. So the calf revenue stream is actually going to be, of sold calves, is going to be less than what we are showing here. Value of cull sold, hey, yeah, big cows are wonderful. We get more money per cow when we sell them. But again, the bottom line for the whole ranch is it just goes down. You make cows bigger, it goes down. Now, this is Chris Ringwald's work from North Dakota, which I know sometime in the last several months on the discussion forum. This one got kicked all around again. And this is a real interesting one to me, because here we see as the cows are getting bigger, the calves are actually getting smaller. And so how can that happen? The way this happened is he collected this data in the bad drought year, I think 2011, in either 2011 or 2012. And so once again, the big cow can't fill her gut. When forage quality and availability becomes limiting, reproduction is the first thing to go. Lactation goes after that. And so the breeding percentage went down on these cows. They're not milking as well. The calves aren't gaining weight from milk, but hey, what the heck? You know, after 90 days, they're more dependent on forage intake than they are on mom's milk. But you know what? If you got big cows out there taking big bites of limited forage, there's no calf quality feed left in the pasture. And so, wow, bigger cows, actually less calf yield. And I'm just going to go to the end one here. The far right column is calf gain per acre. Increased the cow weight from less than 1,300 pounds to over 1,600 pounds, and there was a 50% drop in pounds of beef produced per acre. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, that is not going to work. So, you know, this is where I am on cow size now, is there is a direct inverse relationship between cow size and whole ranch profitability. I have worked these numbers back and forth over and over, and when you roll in cost factors, that the bigger cows cost more, and start looking at the actual margin, the marginal difference becomes even more exaggerated as we go to big cows. I have a real hard time with any cow bigger than 1,200 pounds these days. If we look at physical type of cows, this is a PCC influence cow back in Missouri, and you know, I don't want to say that's an ideal cow, but I think that's a real optimal cow. This cow's 11 years old. She's fall calving. She's grazing stockpiled pasture. This is in February. She's carrying a calf. She's in that good a body condition, 11 years old, good functional udder still on her, has not had a bite of anything other than stockpiled pasture and mineral supplement for 7 years, the last 7 winters. That's a good functional cow. Physically, physiologically, there are some things we can look for in cows that tend to depict good cows. One of them is that depth to body ratio. You look at the total height of the cow, and then how much of her height is made up in body depth. Because that's where the rumen capacity, the grazing capacity is, but it's also, that's where all the meat gets cut out. There's no value down there below the belly. So, you know, I really like cows that are at least 65% total height and depth of body. And then the other linear measure we look at is the top line heart girth ratio. What that cow's saying in the little balloon up there is, I really shouldn't be looking straight for him. Because when you measure the top line, it's from the vertical end of the rump, not the tail head, but you actually put a level on her rump. And so from the end of the rump to the top of the pole, that's the top line. And then the heart girth is the circumference of the animal measured immediately behind the shoulders. Why this ratio is important is for every inch that heart girth exceeds the top line, it increases retail cutout 3 to 4%. You put a big barrel type cow there that has a big heart girth, and that is where you cut out a lot of meat. I'm going to touch a little bit on calving, and you'll notice that I say calve in sync with your forage supply. I generally don't talk about calving in sync with nature, and the main reason I don't is because we have changed nature. It's what people do. We go and change nature. So we have cows, very predictable nutrient demand cycle. Now, this graph shows cow calving in January, not because I'm recommending calving in January, just because it's easy to look at a calendar from January through December. And then this is from work we did at the research station at Linnaeus. So the bar on the left side there, that table, that is the pounds of forage required per cow on a monthly basis. This is about a 1,300 pound cow, Gelfie cross cow, peak lactation up around 40 pounds of milk per day. Way more milk than any beef cow needs. So this is a high producing cow. We all know that the lowest nutrient requirement is when the cow has weaned the calf off, where mid-lact or mid-gestation, and on this January born cow, I'm showing that in August. So that's about, at maintenance, 23 pounds of forage per day she has to eat. And we know that peak lactation or peak demand occurs at peak lactation, which 40, 60, 65 days post-calving. So she has her peak there in March at 43 pounds. That is over 80% increase in nutrient demand by that cow from when she's a dry, pregnant cow at maintenance to when she's at peak lactation. that is a lot of fluctuation in nutrient demand to deal with in a totally grass-based operation. If we take a moderate milking cow, a low to moderate milking cow, that change from dry pregnant status to peak lactation might only be 30 to 40%. And that is a lot easier change in demand to manage in a grass situation. So highest energy demand occurs after rebreeding. I'm going to skip over those two pictures. That was some actual milking studies that we did at Linnaeus with the beef cows. So I talk about matching calving season to the forage supply opportunities. Those, by the way, are the seasons according to the calendar. February is not spring calving. August is not fall calving. So let's name things what they are. So we have native rangeland through a lot of the central plains, the northern plains, into the Rocky Mountain region. And this is where calving in sync with nature. We're actually looking at when the deer, the elk, the antelope are having their babies, and it's what makes sense based on what the supply is. In a lot of these native range settings, June calving makes perfect sense. And I say June calving, yeah, some are going to come in May, some are going to come in July, but that would be the window we would be looking for, June calving. Now, one of the things that we do to change nature is irrigation. So here in central Idaho, through irrigation, we make the growing season start earlier, so we can calve earlier. So I would be looking, if in an irrigated situation, rather than strictly calving and sync with nature, I'd start earlier. We can do it in May. I've said at both of the other meetings, and I have figured this a long time ago, you know, if I could have every calf born on the same day in our irrigated pasture deal, it'd be May 17th. Just because I've kept the grazing records, I know when things are happening, and boom, May 17th, everything would be perfect. That day would be one hell of a day, but in terms of matching the forage supply, that's the day. So let's think about something else, because we had a sale down in Texas, so we had to think about this. Down in southeast Texas, towards Houston, Galveston, kind of between Houston and Austin, the best pasture that they have all year is their annual pastures dominated by annual ryegrass. And that starts coming on pretty good in February down there. Now winters aren't bad. They can have some decent stockpile feed there. Winters aren't bad. And lo and behold, I could make a pretty good argument for calving in January in southeast Texas. It's not at all calving in sync with nature, but annual ryegrass and oats and things like that are not natural in that part of the world. So they have changed the forage supply. So again, I emphasize calving in sync with the forage supply. In Missouri, we had a sale there too. There's this tall fescue grass, and it's got a fungus in it that produces toxic alkaloids. And the greatest toxicity is in May and June. So if you were looking at true spring calving cows coming to peak lactation and trying to get them bred, you're with a spring calving deal, you're looking at calving when the plants are the most toxic. Stockpiled fescue has lower toxicity than active spring growth, and as winter progresses, the toxicity goes down. It also has its best nutritional value in winter or fall and early winter, definitely not in summer. And so here, I would be actually fall calving in the month of October. Once you have mastered stockpiling toxic fescue and managing it effectively for strip grazing, we at the research station, we had fall calving herds that we took through the entire winter with no supplemental feed at all. Performance was very good. You know, there was an ice storm, I remember once, where we fed hay for 2 days. We went out on the third day, we were going to feed some more hay to them, and they were out grazing through the ice, so we took it back to the barn. So think not necessarily just calve in sync with nature. Calve in sync with what your particular grazing resources are. Some of you are strictly native range. Calve in sync with nature is, you know, the appropriate strategy. If you've got irrigation, that changes the game. Okay, we have managing feed costs on both the pasture and the harvested forage fronts. This idea of what's the cow's job. And to me, this is what a cow's supposed to be doing. She rustles her own grub. She seeks out and finds the best bite of feed that she can. She delivers a live calf every 12 months. She weans a healthy calf every year. She stays healthy without a lot of fuss. She needs to spread fertilizer, control weeds, trample seed in for me. There's a whole lot of jobs that she can do, and I want her to come to work with a positive attitude. That's the job description for a cow. It is not a manager's job to, in any business that we're in, it isn't the manager's job to step in and do the employee's job. The manager's job is to create a working environment where that employee can thrive based on what their job is. And that's what we need to do for our cows. We create a working environment where they can be the best cow that they can be. I've been using this for a long time. Some of you have heard this before. But Minnesota, Missouri, Mississippi, based on actual producer records from those states, cow-calf producers feed the same amount of hay. And you have to ask why. And I think we feed hay to the extent that we can make hay. As we made hay making easier and easier with equipment like this, it became very easy to make lots of hay, so we fed lots of hay. Now, let's think about changing times. And this is something Kit hits on a lot. What worked 40 years ago isn't going to work today, and this is exactly why. So in 1973, year I graduated from high school, we bought one of the first 605C balers in the state of Illinois and started custom hay making. Some other things happened in 1973. The first Arab oil embargo was in 1973. We had record high beef prices at $54 a hundredweight, all-time record high. It was so bad that housewives were picketing, at the A&P, IGA stores, whatever stores there were in those days. Kroger saying beef is too expensive, we can't feed our family. What did President Nixon do? He put a cap on beef prices. I think it's the only time in history, maybe in World War II, I'm not sure of that, but in non-war history, it's the only time that a president of the United States says beef prices can go no higher than what they are. So we had this record price in 1973. Any of you old guys remember 1974? The most precipitous drop in the cattle cycle that we have ever experienced. And by the end of 1974, we were at about 18 cents, 18, 19 cents on fed cattle, not 54. High prices beget low prices. All right, so that was 1973. Let's jump up to 2013. I'm doing that because it's 40 years. In 2013, we had an all-time record high cattle price of $148. Of course, in 2014, it went up to $178. But there we are, all-time record high cattle price. 605M baler cost $40,000. Let's put these things in contrast. So, in 1973, that baler cost $4,200. In 2013, $40,000. 950% increase in cost. Diesel fuel. At the start of 1973, when I got out of, graduated from high school and started running that baler pretty well full-time that summer, 17 cents a gallon for diesel fuel. 2013, it was $3.46. That's a 2,000% increase in the input cost. Farm labor, we were paying kids $1.50 an hour to, handle little square bales or drive a rake tractor. Now, $10 to $15 an hour if you can even find someone, so that's an 800 to 1,000% increase. Nitrogen fertilizer, 9 cents a pound, up to 63, 700%. Remember I said the first thing a lot of guys did was cut out their fertilizer applications when times got tough. Of these inputs, that was actually the one that increased the least. All right, so in 73, we were charging $6 a bale for custom baling, an 1,100-pound bale. Looking at custom farming rate guide sheets from multiple states, the range was $9 to $12 a bale, only 50 to 100% increase in the value of that service. We look at the $54 a hundredweight of 1973 as an all-time record price, 148, 275% increase. You see, all this stuff up here has increased 3 to 4 times the rate that the value of the product did. In 1973, it made perfect sense to buy a piece of equipment, bale up every bale of hay you could get around, and run more cows. Because the value of the product relative to the cost of the input or the service was favorable. In 2013, it's completely unfavorable. It does not make any sense in that market to do the things that we did in '73. You ever hear something called inflation? We don't seem to have it in the economy very much anymore. One of these days it'll show up because everything's cyclical. And every time they say, well, we won't have inflation in our lifetime, you better start planning that there's going to be an inflationary period. So let's look at what this means in the terms of inflation. If the only thing that changed between 1973 and 2013 was the general inflation rate in the economy, what should things cost and what should things be worth? That baler should only be $22,000. Diesel fuel, 89 cents. Farm labor, $7.87. Fertilizer, 47 cents. So all of our inputs have increased at a rate markedly above the general inflation rate. That bale, going out and baling up a bale for your neighbor, you should be getting $31.50 for that, not $11. And then the interesting one, just to have kept pace with the value, that record high price of beef in 1973, today, fed cattle should be $284 a hundredweight. Just to have kept up with inflation. So the value of our product has been steadily declining. The cost of producing it has steadily been increasing, and that's why we need a very different business model. Enterprise selection comes into play. There are some pieces in the beef business that are worth more than other pieces. About 10 years ago, 11 years ago I guess now, Norm and Sandy Suter, Millstadt, Illinois, they bought 56 acres. Norm had been a contracting foreman for residential construction, and he was making $56,000 a year when he decided that he wanted to quit building houses and be a farmer. And he didn't want to take a reduction in pay. So he was the first person in consulting role who asked me, how do I net $1,000 an acre? Nobody asked me that before. Commodity cow-calf, you're going to net $1,000 an acre? Not going to happen. What about high-quality grass-fed beef? Could you net $1,000 an acre? Depending on your location, absolutely you could. Commodity corn. You know, when that stuff was $8 a bushel and, you know, irrigated corn was yielding 250 bushels an acre before the land rental went up, before the cost of seed went up, and all those other things, yeah. You could in fact net $1,000 an acre on commodity corn. 320's roughly the price now. Can't begin to do it. What if you were growing vegetables though? Sweet corn, cauliflower, whatever. Yeah, it's possible. When I lived in Missouri, I never produced over 500 pounds of beef on our own farm. About 475 was the most I ever got to. 1,000 pounds of lamb was easy. Depending on where you are, grass-fed lamb has 150% the value of grass-fed beef. And if you can produce twice as much per acre and sell it for 50% more, it might be something worth considering. Free-range eggs. I don't know what you can get for them in Burlington, Colorado, but I'll guarantee you can get a hell of a lot more for them in Boulder, Fort Collins, Denver, Colorado Springs. I did talk to someone earlier today, and $6 to $7 a dozen is what they bring on the Front Range. What do you think they bring in Southern California? $1 an egg, 12 bucks a dozen is what free range eggs are worth. Right here in Burlington, you might get $3, I don't know. But what else do these birds do for you? They can sanitize the ground, layers especially. They tear up manure, eat out larvae. It takes 2 birds per cow. So if you were running 200 cows, you would need 400 layers to be able to move them behind the cows, usually 3 to 4 days behind, to deal with all the manure. Oh, but if you have dung beetles, they will cheerfully eat dung beetles too. So it is a two-edged sword. And now, I said we'd come back to chickens. This is down on Cobb Creek Farm where my son Ian is the cattle manager. Grady Phelan's the chicken manager. Grady was at our Texas sale. And he said for the area that, and they move these hoop houses every day, that's a 600 bird. I believe it's 18, it's either 16 by 36 or 18 by 36. Hoop house, 600 birds, they move them every day. They net $5,000 an acre for the land that they pull these chickens over. How many birds are they doing? 80,000 this year. They expect to be up in the 120 to 140,000 range next year. The chicken guy makes a whole lot more money for the ranch than Ian does as the cattle guy. Americans eat more chicken than beef. I don't know what we here in this room can do to change that, but some people are capitalizing on that trend and selling a whole lot of chickens. Oh, nobody can read that. This is a comparison of 6 different beef enterprises. I'm going to just tell you the numbers that matter and what the enterprises are. Cow-calf, and then cow-calf, you can either sell the calves or move them into a growing program. From the growing stocker, you can either sell them at the end of that phase, put them into a pasture finishing, or a seed stock bull, or a replacement heifer program. And then we have replacement heifers, custom grazing beef stockers, and then bird cows. I just did this about a month ago for a client in Nebraska. You'll see this is with 1,400 pound cows. I'm going to just point out a few things. This is a gross margin analysis, and it comes down to gross margin value per AUD. So for each 26 pounds of forage, because that's all an AUD is, it's just 26 pounds of dry forage. For each 26 pounds of forage consumed by this 1,400 pound cow, they don't even cover operating costs. Because remember, gross margin is the difference between operating cost and value of the product. So cow-calf isn't even covering operating costs. Growing stockers is covering operating costs, but not all the overheads. It's paying something towards overheads, but not much. Pasture finishing, and this is using a value of the, right now the wholesale value of a grass-finished steer in the U.S. is around $2,300. I've used $2,000 here, so it's a conservative deal. An AUD harvested by a finishing animal, $2.13. So covering all operating costs, all overheads, and generating substantial profit. Replacement heifers, basically a break-even deal. I'm going to skip the others because I'm taking way too much time. Okay, so that's with a 1,400 pound cow. The total gross margin, okay, now this is an 1,150 pound cow. You'll see all the gross margins in those 4 enterprises are at least covering operating costs. The replacement heifer, in this example, they needed 40 cents to cover on the gross margin to cover all costs. So that's basically a break-even deal. But notice that the income from the grass-fed beef went to $4.56 per AUD rather than being at $2.13 what has happened here. The only things that I've changed in here is the weight of the cow, and then the target finish weight of the steer or heifer that's going into the finishing program comes down relative to that cow weight, and it takes 5 months less time to finish the calf out of the 1,150 pound cow compared to the 1,400 pound cow. So that increase in carrying capacity, because we have smaller cows, the shortening of the time period to get to the finish point, and then bringing the daily cost per cow down to reflect the smaller cow size, took everything to a positive gross margin and doubled the income potential from the finishing operation here. Now, with the 1,400 pound cow, the total gross margin generated was $36,000. Remember, that has to pay your salary and wages, facility and equipment, depreciation, insurance, taxes, utilities, any of those overheads. Could you do it, 36,000 bucks? Yeah, probably not. Going to the 1,150 pound cow and altering the finishing stream, it goes to $123,000. Smaller cows pay big bucks back. So there's what I have is what determines profitability in grass farming. Having the appropriate kind of cow, calving at the appropriate time of year, grazing as many days of the year as possible with an appropriate enterprise combination, and effectively marketing your production. That's the keys to profitability. Now, I didn't get into effectively marketing your product, because that's another whole day of talking. But the difference is producing food rather than commodities. When you move out of the commodity business into the food business, tremendous things can happen.